Christine from the European Startup Association, and here with Douglas Andrews, and he is one of our startup members, and we're super excited to have him and the startup on board. He has a lot of experience already with businesses and raising some funds and stuff like this. So I think once you get into this startup world once, you might want to do more and more and more, and maybe this happened to you, I don't know. But let me hand over to you to introduce yourself, the company, and maybe tell us a bit more about why you actually started it.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Christine. You're right. Starting companies can actually be habit forming. But let me go back to the beginning. You've asked me to provide a bit about my personal background. I have actually spent over 40 years in global healthcare markets, the first half of which was working with an American pharma multinational that in that time was called Schering-Plough. It was ultimately taken over by Merck. When I left them at the end of 2000, I decided to start the first of a series of startups in the healthcare field, which I started initially in Europe. I've subsequently started 2 generic pharma companies and one medical technology company. Currently, I am heading and raising capital for DoubleWing Health and Beauty, which markets green personal hygiene and wellness products, aka cosmeceuticals, manufactured in Europe, but to be sold in the $12 billion Chinese market. So that's what I've been doing for the past few years.
Thank you so much for sharing it. It's always interesting to listen to all our startups that also have all different kind of experiences. Some don't have any experience in starting a business, some have. And what you're doing is also very interesting because I think obviously the green cosmetics market is a growing market, and it's not so easy, I think, to launch your products in China, and because of all the regulations. So someone like you and your startup comes in very handy for this. So everyone who sees this, make sure you get in contact with them. What kind of challenges did you come across? Maybe, I mean, startups often come across the similar challenges, but it's a very specific market which comes with specific challenges, I would assume. Is there any specific ones that you can point out that you overcame or are still struggling with?
Well, there of course are always obstacles to any starting any new business, but in point of fact, we actually chose this market because it's a relatively easy one to get into. The market entry barriers in China to these types of products, particularly since they instituted cross-border e-commerce a few years ago, are in fact very simple. You have to know how to do it, and my co-founders and I have been working in the Chinese market now for over 10 years. So, and we are very, very well introduced into, for example, the Chinese Food and Drug Administration and other parts of the Chinese government. But in point of fact, it's not a difficult task in order to launch these types of products in this huge Chinese market. The only real, let's say, barrier as such is it is a highly competitive market, as you can expect, and it requires a great deal of promotional expenditure in order to secure a position. Now, we have set for ourselves a target which may not seem to be all that ambitious, which is about 1/4% market share after 5 years, but that will translate into revenues of $50 million. And in fact, we consider that to be our baseline. We're planning to bring other products into the market, and we may be able to do much more than that. But the actual barriers to entry in this market in China are extremely low.
Yes. Oh, okay. I did not know this. Thank you. Very interesting. But like you say, okay, the competition is very high. And I think for every startup, you have to know the market, and it's lovely to see that you already have experience being in the market, actually, but also know the numbers and are very humble with the market share you want. But it's such a huge market that this is actually enough, and it's like you say, the baseline. So, what kind of other or specific characteristics do you think a startup should have?
Well, I think it depends, obviously, on the kind of startup that you're talking about. Is it a technology-based startup, which ours is not? Ours is a commercial startup, and in fact, all of my startups have been commercial. When you leave the pharmaceutical industry and you want to go out as an entrepreneur, unless you have some proprietary technology that you've been able to take with you, which I've not, you're more or less constrained to doing something on the commercial side. Which in fact can also be extremely rewarding if you handle it properly, which we have, generally speaking, over the past few years. The other thing is, I think you have to look at the two different models in terms of entering markets. Either what you want to do is doing what we're doing now, which is going into a huge market and trying to get a relatively low market share, which can still be extremely lucrative, or you go into a niche market and try and get a dominant market share. That, for example, is what the famous American VC Peter Thiel has advocated. He says you should try and go into a market and then have 100% of that market if you can. Now, in fact, in our my previous venture, which was a medtech venture, the market was very small. It was only for across all of Europe was only about 100 million pounds. But we estimated that we could, in the fullness of time, take at least 50 or 60% of that market because the number of competitors was very low. Fortunately or unfortunately, we actually exited that business because we got an offer from an external investor that we could not refuse.
Yes.
It's when we decided to pivot and focus entirely on the Chinese cosmeceutical market. So we went from one type of startup model to another type of startup model.
Yes. Oh, good. Very nice. Thank you. And thank you for sharing also the journey a bit more. And I think it gives the viewers a good overview of what you guys are doing. I will make sure to link back to you underneath this video so that people can find out more about you guys. And yeah, that's really much it. So we're looking forward to having you at our association and supporting you and giving you visibility and finding investment for you and all these amazing things that we hope we can do for you. And thank you so much for your time today. And I will talk to you very soon.
Thank you, Christine.